I remember the first couple of weeks when I first started film school in Melbourne. It brought out a lot of, nerdy film people, as these kind of courses tend to do. And I remember those, first few weeks, and they probably extended on till I really finished the course. It involved a lot of discussion and conversation about films. What films you had watched, what you hadn't, and what were the films you needed to see. It didn't take me long to realize that there was a little bit of a kind of film snobbery happening with certain people in regards to what they thought was absolutely essential viewing if you were going to call yourself a filmmaker or filmmaker to be. Oh, you haven't watched Bergman's The Seventh Seal? And you want to study films? Wait, Andy mate, you're telling me you've never seen a Tarkovsky film? Like, ever? Tell me you've seen Seven Samurai, Andy. Please, for the love of God, tell me you've seen it. These were the kind of responses I would get, because I guess in terms of the history of cinema and filmmaking, I was relatively new. I'd always enjoyed films that I'd seen growing up, but I didn't know that there was this long history of essential classics, I guess. And quickly I got to a little bit of a tizzy, like, man, I really don't know films like I want to know. I want to track down these, apparently essential viewing. The later, as I grew older, I'd realize that, you like what you like, and that's okay. Your filmmaking brings all sorts. But at the time, I felt really twisted up that I was letting the team down in some respects. But with that said, there are still films I have yet to see that have been on my list from all the way back when I first was told about them. And some of these I hope to remedy this year by tracking them down and watching them. So, without further ado, here are the 3 classic films of cinema that I have not seen. Number 1, Casablanca. Now, Casablanca is a bit of a doozy because out of the 3 I've selected, it's probably the one that has leaked into the consciousness and memories of Western culture in terms of its quotability and the lines that are still famous to this day that people use in parodies and homages. This 1942 American romantic film was filmed during World War II and basically tells the story of an American expatriate who must choose between his love for a woman or helping her and her husband, a Czech resistance leader, escape from a Vichy-controlled city of Casablanca to continue his fight against the Germans. And I've read a bit of that from Wiki, so forgive me if I'm not getting it quite right. And it's starring the great Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman, the Swedish actress, who was quite famous in her day. As I was saying, I feel like I could put impressions together of what this film roughly could be about, purely based on the amount of times it's been reinterpreted for either comedic effects or paid homage to in the way some films do. I mean, there's that great episode of The Simpsons where Grandpa Simpson shows a film reel he has that shows an alternative cut of the ending of Casablanca in which the main characters kill Hitler, and then it's just a really random, but I mean, that's how I knew of this film, through things like that. And it generally feels like you grew up with these lines of dialogue embedded into your brain, even if you didn't know that they even belonged to a film that was called Casablanca. I'm just going to read some of these famous lines now, and you'll kind of see that, yeah, that sounds really familiar. So, here's looking at you, kid. Of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world, she walks into mine. We'll always have Paris. Round up the usual suspects. I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. And I imagine there's a few of you who maybe you don't know this film or haven't seen it, but you know those lines of dialogue that I'm reading there because they're just so famous, I guess, in the Western lexicon, and maybe beyond the West as well. I mean, it's just a really famous film. I feel like I've seen little tiny bits of scenes. I've seen people talking about it, but I have yet to actually to watch it. So yes, Casablanca. I mean, now it's getting to over 60 years old, maybe even over 70 years old. So I want to hope that it still holds up to this kind of mammoth task I've given it of living it up to all these years of people talking about how great it is and how it's just a really love story of the ages. So who knows? I'll report back and tell you my thoughts on it. Number 2, 8 and a Half. So this 1963 surrealist comedy drama by the great Italian filmmaker Federico Fellini has been considered one of the greatest films ever made, which is pretty broad, because, like, God, there's a lot of films. It tells the story of an Italian filmmaker who's suffering from a bit of creative, maybe not doubt's the right word, but, struggling with his creativity while he's trying to make this big budget sci-fi film. It kind of looks into that theme of what it means to be creative, as well as being creative in a field like filmmaking, where people expect so much and put you up to a lot of public scrutiny. And apparently it also looks at the idea of, what happiness means and how to find happiness, especially where, at a time when this film was made, the modern world and modernization was really kind of stepping into its, being a great part of the world and how the world was changing. So it's kind of reflecting upon those elements as well. It's filmed in gorgeous black and white, and I've probably watched little bits of 1-minute scenes from this film here and there on YouTube over the years, and it always looks like it's really fantastical, goes into, going into the mind of someone and kind of it being reflected out in a kind of imaginative way. A lot of exaggerated dreamlike sequences, and it kind of looks like something that would be really up my alley. But I've just never watched it. I hate to say it, I've never watched any Fellini films actually at all. And Fellini is considered, one of the greats from that time period, and maybe one of the greats ever of cinema directing. And Fellini is that kind of person that I feel like I should check out not only this film, but his other films as well, like La Dolce Vita. I'm probably mispronouncing that. Another film considered one of the greatest, and the film that originated the word paparazzi as well, named after one of the characters, I think, who basically acts in the very way that most paparazzi act now. And I don't know, it's going to be interesting. I'll report back what I think. It's also going to be my first experience with seeing a work by Fellini, so yeah, hopefully it's good. Number 3, Tokyo Story. Now I'm like a little bit embarrassed by this one because this is by the great Yasujiro Ozu, a Japanese filmmaker who made a lot of films in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and then some later ones in the 60s before he passed away. And I'm a big fan of his style and other work, but I have not seen this particular film, which is considered, one of his greatest. It's a 1953 Japanese drama film that tells the story of an aging couple who travel to Tokyo to visit their grown children. And basically, it's looking at the contrast between the behavior of their children, who are now adults, who are busy, too busy basically to pay much attention to their aging parents, and also with that of their widowed daughter-in-law, who treats them almost the opposite, with a lot of great kindness. And it's widely regarded as one of Ozu's, basically a masterpiece, as I was saying, and is often cited as one of the greatest films ever made, which is huge praise. But the reason I'm embarrassed to admit that I haven't watched it is because I've actually seen other Ozu films and really liked them, and really got into a bit of an Ozu wormhole in terms of talking about his style and like the way he filmed things and the way he talked to actors, the way he moved the camera or didn't move the camera in many cases. And I've seen films like Tokyo Twilight, I've seen An Autumn Afternoon, Late Spring, and I all think they're great, but yet why haven't I tracked down and watched the one which people consider to be his best one? It's not like I'm saving it for a special occasion or doing anything like that. It just felt like I just didn't get around to it. And then, when I first got into this Ozu interest of his filmography, it was a time before, I really knew how to download things from the internet, and, streaming services weren't really big back then, and, kind of exited out of my mind a little bit. But now that he's back on, and now that I'm thinking about it, I'm sure it'd be very easy to find a copy to watch of Tokyo Story. Judging by his other films, he's a director that seems to tread along the same path in terms of what his stories are about. They're very much about family issues, and he often repeats storylines to a certain extent in various different iterations of his films. But in the films that I've seen of his, that I think that doesn't necessarily make them boring or seeming like it's going over old ground. There's always something new to me when I watch an Ozu film, and I feel like Tokyo Story, his crowning achievement, I guess, is something that will do the same. So yeah, that's my 3 classic films that I have yet to watch: Casablanca, 8.5, and Tokyo Story. I'm gonna hopefully try and watch them before the end of this year. I can really watch them, not just have them in the background somewhere when I'm doing work or anything like that, which sometimes I tend to do with some films if I'm particularly busy. I really want to dedicate time to sit down, watch those films, and see if they give me something that I've heard other viewers or even friends and colleagues talk about when they watch their work. And I will report back, and and basically I'll let you know how I go. I mean, please like and subscribe, of course, if you're interested in doing that. And also tell me in the comments, what are the classic films from cinema, from any decade or period that, you know, have been absolute must-sees, but yet you've just never watched them, that you've never got the time, or you never had the interest maybe, or maybe the hype around them made you avoid them for some reason, which sometimes can happen, I imagine. Let me know. I'm curious to see what you guys, some of the titles that might come up. But once again, thanks for tuning in, and have a good one.